3 months ago. So thank you again for gracing us with your presence. Welcome back. Before we start, I'd like to give a special thank you to our president, Mr. Herman Mashaba, who always really does make the time to come and support all 101 representatives that are from ActionSA in all 3 spheres of government in the work that we do. So we thank you for that, President, and especially because today is your 43rd anniversary with your wife. Happy anniversary. So happy anniversary to you and Mekoni, who also really does support that we do extensively as ActionSA. Today I get to have the privileged colleagues of facilitating this press conference, which is set to outline ActionSA's bold legislative agenda for the 2025 session of the 7th Parliament and our ongoing efforts to consolidate the opposition voice under the fast-growing green umbrella. And in line with this commitment to ensure that we give South Africans value for their vote, we have promised that we will report back on our parliamentary performance every 3 months. Just to give colleagues context of what we have promised to give Ndata Mashaba, that as the 6 we will be punching above our weight, punching like we are 60. There are some fun stats that we've seen from the Parliamentary Monitoring Group where written questions from our party far exceeded the official opposition. So, in a place where we are devoid of opposition, the opposition voice, ActionSA has showed itself to be the voice of the voiceless. To give our parliamentary review and progress, it will be, I'll call to the floor Dr. Khosi Letlape, our NHI specialist.
Good morning. I guess if I'm being introduced as an NHI specialist, it means I'm a specialist in a category that does not exist in the Health Professions Council. But I'll take that. I'll take that on board. I'm here just to give you a brief outline of our activities in Parliament as the Super Six, we call ourselves. When the President gave us our marching orders, he said, we expect you to behave like there's 60 of you, even though there's only 6 of you. And that has been borne out by the fact that, small as we are, our number of questions that we ask, it's like we are a party of 90. And I hope that continues into the future. But more importantly is what do we bring to Parliament? What we bring to Parliament is constructive dialogue. We're not one of those parties that opposes things for the sake of opposing things. We're fortunate to be a party where all of us have certain competences. That's why we were brought to Parliament from all the members of ActionSA. We've also been given the liberty to understand the policies of the party, but we are not in a straitjacket. The party understands that all of us are capable, we can think, and so far we've done well to uplift the policies of the party. We question the executive all the time, but our questions are relevant to the day-to-day experiences of South Africans. We don't ask questions for the sake of questioning. We have an interest in activities of all the committees of Parliament. There's more than 40 of them, there's 6 of us, but we're interested in all subjects. We work as a team. We cover for each other, we cover the gaps, and that's what symbolizes who we are. We're getting to a point where on particular matters, we can finish our other members' sentences. One of the things that we take seriously as members of Parliament is oversight. Oversight that is not scheduled. You've seen what our MP, Derlin James, has done from those oversights. You do oversight, and in a few months, there's commitment to build a police station. When police were sitting in prefabs, were sitting in dilapidated stuff. We get called by members on the ground. We do oversight on issues like absence of drugs, shortage of drugs in KZN. So we are a party here not to represent the interests of the party. All of you are aware that when Dr. Nasipi Moya took office in Tshwane, she said, I'm not a mayor of ActionSA. I'm a mayor of the people of Tshwane. There's only 6 of us, but we're here to represent the interests of all 60 plus million citizens of the country. That is why we are interested in projects like Spaza for Locals. We are interested in the welfare of unemployed health professionals. But not only do we have an interest, we also provide possible solutions to the issues that we raise. The President has been steadfast in speaking up for the 3 fellow citizens in terms of the Lily Mine tragedy. We are concerned about what happens in ArcelorMittal and in loss of jobs. We have members that will speak to issues of financial prudence, where we do not only criticize over expenditure excesses, but we put proposals on how we can make our budgets meet. So our approach is not about the fact that there's lack of resources. Our approach is about being resourceful. The party was started by a resourceful man who was able to build a multi-million rand empire with no BEE rules in a hostile era coming from humble beginnings. So we're a party that represents all South Africans, whether you come from the suburbs, whether you come from Elalini, whether you come from the Squatter camps, we are here for all South Africans. When we talk about curbing expenses, we talk about right-sizing of the government. And my colleagues will speak to those issues. We don't criticize travel for the sake of criticizing travel. When we say these are difficult times, we should go into austerity measures. We, as parliamentarians, should lead by example. We can't expect ordinary people to make sacrifices when we, as Parliament, are not prepared to make those sacrifices. When we engage in debate, we will engage on a factual basis. We deal with issues on an issue-by-issue basis. We don't come with a position from the party that says, if someone says so, the answer is no. We are given the latitude to engage, to listen, and to be constructive in what we put out there. Budget votes, it should be based on merit. We are not a poor country, but we are a wasteful nation. And we need to ensure that those issues are addressed. We need to ensure that people are held accountable. We have been steadfast about talking about what type of person should become an MP, so that when we deal with issues, we deal with issues on matters of principle. On the issue that impacted on Honorable Hlophe, we said you cannot play the man, play the ball. So if any of us are fit to be MPs, we should be fit to go into any position that any MP can go to. Where ActionSA wants you to go to is there should be a standard to be met to become an MP. So that once we are in, the notion that we are honorable should be applicable to all of us in terms of character. Let that be done at the front gate, not inside. Once you pass the gate, we should be equal, we should respect each other, and we should all have rights. That's why we've pursued the issues of possible executives that are impacted on issues of corruption. And we've been steadfast in asking for accountability. And you need to be assured that this party is not a party that puts the party first. As we've been told by our president, our duty is to put the people of South Africa first. That's what we do, and that's what we will continue to do. Thank you.
Well done, Doc.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Doc. I think you're here to reaffirm to South Africans that our representation as ActionSA in Parliament, no matter the size, it reflects our respect for this institution and its vital role in defending and advancing the best interests of our people. We are very clear in our commitment that we are not merely here to occupy seats, but to fight tirelessly for the reforms that our country so desperately needs. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call on our second speaker, who is our caucus leader, Mr. Ethel Trollope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. At the outset, I just want to make a comment that I make often, and it's an important observation that I've been an elected public representative for about 25 years, but leading this caucus has been a singular pleasure for me, but also a unique experience in that apart from me, my colleagues have no political experience, but they're all professionals. And they have brought that professionalism and independence to our caucus, which really defines ActionSA in Parliament. I don't believe that there's anyone who doesn't know about ActionSA, and it's based on the professionalism and the performance of those people. So we decided very early on in our tenure, and we did not join the Government of National Unity. By our own choice, we chose to be non-aligned. And we are perfectly positioned as a pivot in this Parliament between the massive GNU bloc of around 70% and the so-called Progressive Caucus in Parliament. We're the next biggest opposition party that is non-aligned. And I think it's a really important position to hold, and we hold that jealously. Our role in the legislative agenda is defined by our non-alignment, which means that we are an opposition party, but we've also defined ourselves as a constructive opposition. We have said that we will not vote along parochial party lines, but we will vote on issue-by-issue basis, and if we're convinced that the government is doing something right, we will support them. If we believe that the government is losing the plot or taking the wrong direction, we will certainly oppose that. And our voting record in Parliament illustrates the fact that we are an objective, constructive opposition. And I must say it's a wonderful role to be able to fulfill. We don't align parochially, we align with South Africans, as my colleague Dr. Letlape so eloquently put just now. We have also committed through practice and training and strategizing that we will use every parliamentary lever at our disposal. So as my colleague, the facilitator said, our track record on questions is unparalleled in the ranks of the opposition. And I'm very proud of that, and it will get better, Doc. I have no doubt about that. We will sustain that. We also speak in every debate. Even though we might not be able to tend a portfolio committee, we make sure that we inform that we represent South Africans in every single debate, and we have a very proud record in that regard. Doc Letlape mentioned about going on unscheduled oversight. Now, that is key to being an effective MP, that you go and pick up issues on the ground and bring them to Parliament, and we've got many examples of that. The ArcelorMittal loss of jobs is a classic case in point. I was phoned by a business person who deals in steel on Friday to ask, what are we doing about the loss of these jobs? I contacted our research team and I said, can you please draw everything that we've said on ArcelorMittal long steel? Alan Beasley, our representative in finance and on other economic clusters, had issued an opinion piece, a number of statements, speeches, and I was able to forward those documents immediately at the press of a button. And this representative couldn't believe. He said, but you guys are so small. We're not small. There's a saying that says, if you think small is insignificant, you haven't spent a night with a mosquito in a dark room. So I think that's the role that we're fulfilling. But I want to talk specifically today about what we're doing here. First of all, ActionSA is proud to announce that our cabinet reform package and the zero tolerance corruption bill are two new bold legislative actions for 2025. ActionSA is committed to being a constructive opposition, and I've illustrated how we plan to do that. But we want to do more than just being an opposition. We want to bring alternatives. We want to change the status quo. There are examples in the rest of the world now where people are taking chainsaws to the status quo. Javier Milei was the first person to do that. We've got the Doge in America, but nothing changes in South Africa. So we want to be part of that change. As such, today's announcement marks the first suite of ActionSA bold initiatives for our term in the 7th Parliament, set to fundamentally reshape governance in South Africa and strike at the very heart of corruption that we have identified as enemy number one in South Africa. So the first one is Cabinet Reform Package. As South Africa grapples with a fiscal crisis driven by reckless government wastage, ActionSA's Cabinet Reform Package offers an immediate solution to eliminate conservatively 1.5 billion rand a year in taxpayers' funds squandered on a bloated executive every year. This indulgence in wasteful perks allows 32 ministers and 43 deputy ministers and their large staff complements to live the life of luxury while demanding that taxpayers and ratepayers foot their bill. Now, that's completely unacceptable. And the very first thing that we're going to do, we saw what happened with the budget around a 2% VAT hike, but we're going to kick against many more things. So the very first thing that I want to refer you to is Section 92 of the Constitution that says Section 93, the President may appoint deputy ministers. It's not a constitutional provision. It's an option that the President has, and our party have identified that we will have no deputy ministers. They fulfill no good function. All of my colleagues will confirm here, you sit in a portfolio committee, they sit there like a broomstick, got nothing to offer, can't speak, only the cabinet minister can speak. Only thing they do really well is travel. And I'll give you an example. That the deputy minister frequently outspend their senior counterparts with minimal impact. The Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, in the last 7 months has spent 2.02 million on travel. Deputy Minister David Masondo has spent 3.9 million on travel. And Deputy Minister Ashur Sarapin, 2.09 million. So together they've spent 3 times more than the minister. I've sat in a defense portfolio committee where the deputy minister is was a general, didn't say a word in a meeting because he has no constitutional place and provision. So they are superfluous. So ActionSA passed that, Mr. President, 2 years ago at our policy conference. We made that decision. So we're talking about that today. This will be done. We will cut the cabinet down to size. And the first bold measure as part of our cabinet reform package is to close the taps on executive wastage. ActionSA will be tabling a constitutional amendment not only to abolish deputy ministers, but in Section 93 of the Constitution it says, the Deputy President and ministers are responsible for the powers and functions of the executive, and members of cabinet are accountable collectively and individually to Parliament. They're accountable to Parliament. So what we're saying is, we want to change the legislation so that the President can nominate members of cabinet, but Parliament must sanction them. So if he wants to nominate corrupt members of Parliament, people that have got judgments against them to serve on cabinet, we must be able to say no. Just like you do with the Judicial Service Commission, parties nominate their representative and Parliament sanctions their appointment. We're going to bring that into legislation so that's no longer the sole preserve. Yes, the President can nominate, but we have to sanction. We do not want corrupt ministers in government. We need exemplary ministers in government. So we will ratify and move that Parliament will ratify that. It will break the patronage cycle that is so entrenched. We have 2 ministers, at least 2. There are many more, but I'm going to mention 2. Minister Similane arrived in cabinet under a cloud of corruption related to BBS. Minister Nchaveni, who plays a very significant role in Ramaphosa's cabinet, has got judgments of corruption and maladministration against her, yet he does nothing about it. We have a president who does nothing about his corrupt colleagues. Secondly, as part of our cabinet reform package, we will urgently table the cut cabinet perks bill. Now, it's interesting. A member of the opposition in the last government brought a private member's bill in this regard. They've allowed it to lapse and become redundant because they are now part of government. We're going to resuscitate that legislation, but we're going to bring even more stringent controls around wastage. So that's cutting excessive cabinet expenditure. The next item that we'll talk about today is the zero tolerance of corruption bill. As I've said, Mr. Mashaba has identified corruption as enemy number one. He did that not only in word, but in deed when he was the mayor of Johannesburg, and he continues to lead us in that regard, not paying lip service to it, but actually dealing with corruption. So there's some things that we've identified that we're going to do to strengthen the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, PRECA. Now, here are the three things that we're going to talk about. The first one is mandatory minimum sentences. Increasing the minimum sentence for corruption involving transactions exceeding 500,000 to 15 years imprisonment. Mr. President, you know, maybe when you were the mayor and I was the mayor at the same time, 500,000 was a lot of money. But now people don't steal in millions, they steal in billions. And Alan Beasley, my colleague, is going to talk about how billions get wasted and stolen. So the very first thing, 500,000, 15 years imprisonment. That's the kind of example we want to see in South Africa. And then the second one is robust sanctions for private sector corruption. Corruption does not take place in a vacuum. There are corruptors and corruptees. And my colleague, Dr. Letlape, this morning was saying that there are enablers, people in the executive, people in procurement, people who award tenders, people in local government, people in provincial government, people in national government. They are the enablers. We want to make sure that we stop private sector corruption and collaboration between the public and the private sector to have corrupt tenders that don't actually deliver on their mandate. And then, importantly, permanent disqualification, barring anyone convicted of corruption from holding public office, serving as an accounting officer, working for the state, or registered non-profit organizations, or holding elected positions within political parties. ActionSA is the only party, I believe, that actually holds their public representatives to account and making sure that they are exemplary. What we're looking for is blacklisting. Blacklisting of people who have been allowed to siphon public funds. All the people that were involved in state capture should be blacklisted for life. In fact, they should go to jail because it's way over 500,000 rand each. So there's the classic example. But none of them have been prosecuted, none of them have been sent to jail, and none of them have been blacklisted. Another person who comes to mind is a person like Edwin Sodi. He gets contracts across the country, from ANC governments, from coalition governments. He continues to get contracts, doesn't deliver, and siphons off money. He should be blacklisted, but so too should the people who facilitate or enable him achieving those contracts be blacklisted for life. So it is with that said that I find it really exciting that a party that has been in Parliament for less than a year and a party that has been in existence for just over 4 years is bringing these bold kind of initiatives to Parliament to lead by example, to show that we put South Africans first and that we don't just vote blindly against the government. We have shown in 7 months that we are prepared to look at the merits, but we are also prepared to hold the government to account. And we're going to continue holding the government to account. A perfect example of that is that Dr. Letlape on Friday is going to lead a debate in Parliament about unemployed medical practitioners, frontline medical practitioners who are not being employed by the state, yet people who are ill, when they go to clinics, hospitals, cannot see a doctor. Dr. Letlape has driven that, has initiated the debate, and is going to be leading that debate. So we are that classic archetypal mosquito in a dark room, and we're going to get better at it. As we learn, we will become better at it. But one thing we commit to South Africans, we are not going to be predictable. We are going to operate on from our professional backgrounds, on the merits of every single item that we encounter. Dereline James is going to speak just now. I'm not going to steal her thunder, but she has also shown every time she goes on oversight, the whole of South Africa sees what she sees. But the people in charge of corrections or police don't seem to have been able to see that. So what we see with our feet, we are going to show South Africans, and we will represent them in Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thanks, AT.
Kabani kaloko.
Well, thank you, Mr. AT. We call him AT, Ethel Trollip, who has just said we will not be predictable, and as ActionSA, we will not be content with just delivering speeches alone, but we will use every parliamentary mechanism to push for real change. And this means that we will be lobbying, mobilizing, and rallying around support for common sense cabinet bills and initiatives like the cabinet reform package and the zero tolerance corruption bill. To give us a technical walkthrough of the cabinet reform bill will be our numbers guy, the guy who serves on our finance portfolios on SCOPA and the Department of Trade and Industry, Mr. Alan Beasley.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry.
Nobody likes to talk about finance.
Nobody likes it.
That's thunder.
Yeah.
You see, he collapses everything he comes across.
And good morning, everyone. As someone who serves on the Standing Committee on Finance, SCOPA, and the Auditor General, I've been blown away by the amount of corruption, incompetence, and wastage in government departments and entities. In the last 2 weeks, SCOPA has had presentations by the Special Investigation Unit and Auditor General into the Department of Defence and Military Veterans, DENEL, Unemployment Insurance Fund, Compensation Fund, Sector Educational and Training Authorities, and Eskom. The amount of leakages in the system is difficult to comprehend. As Ethel said, we're not talking millions, we're talking billions and billions. The uninsured insurance fund and the compensation fund alone have a combined annual revenue of 46 billion. They both are a cesspool of corruption, incompetence, and wastage. It's very difficult to comprehend. They say a fish rots from the head. This is so true in South Africa, where our head body, the cabinet, is clouded in corruption controversies and has no regard for setting an example how to prudently spend government resources. In this regard, I'm looking forward to reintroducing the Cut the Cabinet Perks Bill, which was originally introduced by Minister Schreiber in 2022. The bill, which ActionSA will be introducing, will build on the Remuneration of Public Officers Bearers Amendment Bill, which lapsed on the 21st of May 2024 when the 6th Parliament was dissolved. I'm very grateful to Minister Schreiber for the hard work that went into the bill, but I'm certainly not surprised that the DA have let the bill lapse and have become silent on the subject. When the bill was introduced, the DA raised the need to reduce the luxury lifestyle of rockstar ministers and deputy ministers and raised the concern that South Africans are struggling to put food on the table whilst ANC cadres and cabinet live in luxury. As ActionSA, we could not agree more with these sentiments, but now the ANC cadres include ministers and deputy ministers from parties across the GNU. In a country that is racked with poverty, unemployment, and inequality, and with more than 50% of households going to bed hungry tonight, it is morally incomprehensible that the 75 members of cabinet live a life of opulence. This opulence includes personal and administration staff, VIP drivers and protectors, official motor vehicles, international travel, official and state-owned residences. When the bill was being introduced, the DA estimated what each of the above was costing taxpayers a year. What is so interesting is that the cost for international travel was estimated at 20 million a year. In terms of the 21 responses received so far to written questions posed by ActionSA, indicates a whopping 143 million in travel expenses between July and December 2024. Extrapolated across the full cabinet, this could amount to 215 million in 6 months or 430 million annually, with most of these costs being overseas travel. Since the GNU, travel has gone from 20 million to 430 million. Talk about a runaway train. no wonder the DA and others in the GNU are quiet. As Action SA, we will not be quiet and believe it is imperative that there is greater transparency, oversight and cost control over the perks of office for the President, Deputy President, Ministers and Deputy Ministers. In terms of the existing legislation, the biggest weaknesses that Action SA wants to address through the Cut the Cabinet Bill perks are, firstly, the President can unilaterally determine the perks for the Deputy President, Minister and Deputy Ministers via proclamation in the Government Gazette. Secondly, there is no need for the President to consider relevant factors such as prevailing economic conditions or comparative costs in calculating the cost of these perks. Thirdly, there is no ongoing review of these perks. To address these weaknesses, the bill will, firstly, ensure that the President must report all changes in the Deputy President, Ministers and Deputy Ministers' perks to Parliament before implementation. Secondly, ensure that consideration is to given what the changes in the perks will cost and consider recommendations from the Independent Remuneration Commission and consider the broader economic environment. Thirdly, ensure that Parliament must debate all changes to Cabinet perks before implemented. And lastly, ensure that there is a detailed review of perks within 12 months and thereafter every 5 years. The Cut the Cabinet Perks Bill is an important legislation amendment. It was important when the DA introduced the bill 2 years ago, and it has become increasingly more so now that the GNU ministers and deputy ministers have got the taste of caviar and a champagne lifestyle. It is time for proper transparency, oversight and cost control for cabinet perks. This is what the bill will achieve. It is grossly unfair that the government is looking at increasing taxes which will impact on the poorest of the poor. South Africans should no longer be paying for corruption, incompetence and wastage of state resources. Cabinet must lead the way. They are failing in this regard. Thank you.
Well done, Alan.
Okay. Ellen, well done on that. I think South Africans now have an eye view of exactly what this GNU government is failing to do in terms of placing the needs of South Africans first, especially the poorest of the poor. Would like to apologize. We've received apologies from our Chief Whip, Lerato Ngobeni, who is unwell at the moment. She had an accident and she is now indisposed. But we'll keep on, keep on with the good work on her behalf.
I think she's really frustrated that she's not here.
Yeah, she would have loved to be here, our resident facilitator, but at the moment I'm carrying on where she has left. I guess, South Africans, you can see that these are just not proposals that we are putting up. They are real solutions that Ellen has shown that are designed to restore accountability and cut unnecessary wastage that has favored patronage over efficiency and good governance. I'm going to call on our next speaker who's going to give us the technical walkthrough of the Zero Tolerance Corruption Bill, Ms. Derilyn James, who always insists that swear kan dit nie aangaan nie.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our facilitator this morning, and good morning to everyone here. Good morning to the media, and good morning to our fellow South Africans, the most important people in the room this morning. I always have my notes perfectly written, and I'm always have it, and then when I get here, it goes out of the window because then I actually reflect on the actual reality that is happening on the ground. And what you see happening and unfolding in our country, I think we've become comfortable in normalizing the abnormal. And through normalizing the abnormal, we have stripped South Africans of their dignity. And it is with that that Action SA is seated here today. President, I always used to look at this man back in the day before I stepped into politics. And I used to think during his tenure as mayor in Johannesburg and watch the television and think, die man is altyd aan about corruption. Whenever I switch on the television, it's always Herman Mashaba clamping down on corruption. When is he actually going to get to the real issues, the bread and butter issues that affects most South Africans? When is he going to speak about the fact that we don't have libraries in our communities? When is he going to speak about the fact that we don't have social workers? When is he going to see to the grass in the community? And now that I'm here, President, that is the barrier that exists in all of the portfolios that I serve in. I now understand why this man, Herman Mashaba, was always on about addressing corruption, because corruption is the number one public enemy that stops this country and our communities from flourishing. I want to say that I have been in this space for all of 7 months now. And I can almost tell why people have become comfortable in those cultures. They haven't walked the streets and they haven't done. And I think one of the favorite things that I love doing as an MP is doing oversight. And what I found in oversight and why things aren't working in these spaces, it is as a result of corruption. When I walk through the doors of social development and when I drive through the streets here in the beautiful city, a well-run city for all, although it's not so much for all, Ethel, because I see so many children standing and begging on the street corners, and I reflect on what is happening in Johannesburg, where you have 13 officials that has been suspended with pay for over a year because of allegations of corruption, and 2 years later, they get back into their comfortable seats without any consequences. That is the reason why we are here today. When I walk through the police stations and I find families meeting me at those doors saying to me that they've had a rape victim, the case has been bought. When I get phone calls from police members saying that, Dee, you know what, the station commander said we must just go buy a similar exhibit and replace it when it has gone missing. That is corruption. When I walk through DCS and find the many televisions in those cells, and when I think and see everyone smoking and behaving like it's a recreational center there, I think to myself, as families and as mums out there in communities, you know, sometimes sending your child and your loved one to prison, it's almost the last straw. Because you think that they're going to come out from that space, reformed, rehabilitated, a better person. Instead, you find corrupt officials taking money from them so that they can continue their drug use, so that they can continue selling drugs, running their drug syndicates from their comfortable prison cells. It is unfortunate to see what is unfolding in our communities. It is unfortunate to even see what is unfolding in this government, in this parliament that I thought that I'm going to come to, and you know what, we're going to give recommendations, we're going to hold ministers to account. At this point, ministers aren't even attending those portfolio committee meetings. They're not even attending the oversight. Where are they? If they are meant to account to us as MPs, where's Pieter Groenewald? Not even 1 day out of the 5 days where we were conducting oversight did he show up. It is with this, fellow South Africans, that I say I am pleased today that as ActionSA we are introducing strict and stringent reforms to what is already there on paper. We always say that South Africa, when it comes to our policies and our legislation on paper, we rank number one. But that's often where it stays, Ethel. It remains on paper. So as ActionSA, we are here today to say, and we are here to propose strengthening of the PRECA bill. Number one, to broaden the definition of corruption, because we've seen how it's changed. The acts of corruption has been changing like a chameleon. Number two is to strengthen accountability, because too often we all know what is happening in our spaces and we're too quiet, fearing victimization. And that cannot be. At whose expense? At the expense of ordinary South Africans suffering in our communities. With that, allow me to read to you the proposed amendments of the PRECA bill. These amendments focus on two areas: broadening the definition of corruption and strengthening accountability. To ensure comprehensive coverage of corrupt activities, ActionSA proposes amendments to expand the definition of corruption, including abuse of political power. Do you know who I am? Do you know who's my party? What can I do for you? Explicitly incorporate abuse of political power for personal or political gain and trading in influence. Price gouging in public procurement. Recognize price gouging in public procurement process as a corrupt act. It cannot be that something costs 20 Rand a glass
By 100.
And you pay 100 rand. So kan dit nie aangaan nie. Gross negligence include gross negligence in the exercise of government authority under the ambit of corruptions. Non-reporting of corruptions, because you'll often hear, when we have, I remember during state capture, there were so many witnesses that came to the front and said, I knew and I felt that something wasn't right, but I didn't speak out. And this is why we're saying non-reporting of corruption, make the non-reporting of corruption a criminal offense. Extending liability to individuals who ought to have reasonably been aware of corrupt activities but failed to report them. Private sector corruption, it is also rife there. Ensure the definition encompasses private sector corruption, reinforcing the accountability of businesses and corporate entities. I don't want to be long. Accountability in terms of strengthening accountability to strengthen deterrence. ActionSA calls for stricter penal provisions, including enhanced sanctions for public office holders, accountability for corporate corruption, permanent disqualification, introduce legislative amendments permanently bearing anyone convicted of corruption form. You know what comes to mind? We often hear when we have projects and construction happening, you see the same person having messed up in the previous construction, and they get reappointed. Why aren't we blacklisting them? Because they are politically connected. Serving as an holding public office, serving as an accounting officer, working for the state or registered non-profits, I think Ethel covered this, holding elected positions within political parties, mandatory minimum sentences. I know when I was reading this, I was also thinking, what could this be harsh? But for where we're at, we need harsh actions and sanctions. Increase the minimum sentence for corruption involving transactions exceeding 500,000 to 15 years imprisonment without the option of a fine or parole, because that's all that's been happening, a fine or parole. South Africans, in conclusion, corruption remains the single greatest threat to South Africa's democratic progress and economic stability. This is why we don't have jobs in our communities. This is why our children are falling prey. This is why our prisons are bursting by its seams. Strengthening PRECA through the Zero Tolerance Corruption Bill amendment is essential to restoring public trust and ensuring those responsible for corruption face decisive justice. ActionSA remains steadfast in its commitment to eradicating corruption and building a transparent, accountable government. Let me say this. Accountability is a daily commitment to excellence. And this is why we are here today, to recommit our daily commitment to excellence and to serving South Africans. I thank you.
Well done.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dereline James. I did tell you that she is the advocate of Suakandetni Ankhani. We can't go on with corruption. We can't look over it anymore, but we need to really be dedicated to the cause of ensuring that it is eradicated completely in our public sector. But beyond all of this, beyond our legislative work, ActionSA has been committed to building a united opposition voice under the Green umbrella. Just last week, I was with Ndate Mashaba when he was in the Limpopo province, welcoming a couple more, I think 3 more political parties under the Green umbrella, which was a huge feat, something that I'm really, really proud to be part of, especially leading towards the 2026 local government elections. But I'll give Ndate Mashaba to tell South Africans more about the Green umbrella and the expansion thereof. Ndate Mashaba.
Thank you very much, colleagues, particularly the Super 6 or the Super 60. And I heard Dr. Letlapi saying the Super 90. So I think he gives us all the reason in the world to say in a few months' time we're going to demand 120. So at this rate, I think I'm sure South Africans will agree with me that this Super 6 it's actually demonstrating to South Africans that you can have 6 parliamentarians, but actually doing the work of 120 people. And I think we're really very proud of that. I think before I start with my closing remarks for this conference, to officially and openly apologize to my dear wife, Connie. On a day where we're celebrating 43 years of our marriage, to be here in Cape Town instead of being with her, I think, and I recognize the sacrifices she has to make, and my family, because she didn't marry a politician. When I got married to her, I was working as a dispatch clerk for Spa Pretoria in Hercules. And all of a sudden, a few years ago, she finds herself married to a man who is more concerned about fixing the country than actually fixing our own family. So I recognize that, and I'd really like to thank him and my family for really allowing me the space, because if I wasn't really doing this job, I feel I'll be a drunkard today or be in a mental institution. Honestly, I feel I'll be in a mental institution or a drug addict, because in an alcohol addict, because of the frustrations I had to endure throughout my life under the apartheid system, under the last 30 years of real abuse by a new democratic government. So my wife and the family, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I want to congratulate ActionSA Super 6 for the suite of meaningful reforms. This was the exact purpose they are here being sent here, to introduce pragmatic, bold legislation that puts South Africans first, not by delivering clever speeches, but by using every legislative mechanism available to them to give expression not only to the promises we made before the election, but also to the values of our party, namely fighting corruption and ending the abuse of taxpayers' money. Importantly, I'm most proud that the introduction of our proposed Tracker amendment by our team, which is perfectly in line with ActionSA's long-standing fight against corruption. You heard what Derelin said earlier on. During my tenure as executive mayor of the city of Johannesburg, my own fight against corruption led to the city uncovering 35 billion rands in 3 years, 35 billion rands of fraud and corruption, wasted through corruption, and more than 6,000 cases of corruption being investigated by the relevant authority. And what is actually even more painful and hurtful is that there's not really been any serious consequences to those involved. No serious consequences. 35 billion rands, we're not talking small monies here. 35 billion we covered in just 3 years. And some of the cases, fellow South Africans, to share with you, they were as clear as daylight. Clear as daylight. I want to just give you an example so that I illustrate the veracity of what I'm talking about. When I was the mayor, I discovered that the city of Johannesburg gave away the most valuable piece of property to a Gupta-linked company. You know where the Sentinel train station is? I call that site a crime scene, because it is a crime scene. The city of Johannesburg gave that property, the prime piece of real estate in South Africa, to a Gupta-linked company for nothing. They said you'll pay us 370 the day when you've developed the site, but gave them the the title deed in advance. When I discovered this, when I was the mayor, discovered that this Gupta-linked company went to the market, came out with plans for redevelopment of a mixed-use development, went out to raise 420 million rands to investors. Instead of actually building and give the city the 370 million rands, they ran away with the 420 million rands. Up to today, there's no consequences. When I checked this, I went to lay criminal charges myself to Johannesburg police station. Up to today, the NPA tells us they don't have enough evidence to prosecute. Tell me, do you understand why I would be a drunkard or I'll be in a mental institution? The NPA says they don't have enough evidence to prosecute. So this is just really one of many of examples that some of these cases was as clear as daylight. So our zero tolerance corruption bill will reform a key pillar of anti-corruption legislation to tackle criminality and lawlessness, which I've dedicated and will continue to dedicate my life to work to combating this scourge. The legislation unveiled today is not only a reflection of the hard work of the Super 6 MPs, but also an effort to present a credible opposition voice. This legislation is a clear call to all parties in Parliament. If you are serious about cutting executive waste and ending the scourge of corruption, join us in passing this legislation. We as ActionSA, we're calling on all the other parties, please support this legislation. Many of you campaign on these very issues. This is common ground we can work on for the benefit of the people of South Africa. This is not an ActionSA piece of legislation. It's a piece of legislation for people of South Africa. Let me be clear. We will work with other parties to pass this legislation. It does not matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as it catches the mouse. Addressing these two critical issues will require us to work across the aisle and, most importantly, to make our parliament work for the first time. As ActionSA, to just share you on the growth of the green umbrella, as Honorable just said. ActionSA, we are on a mission to grow the green umbrella. In just few months, we expanded, unprecedented, historic, and we're proud about that. We expanded from 90 councillors in 2 provinces to representation in 7 provinces with 134 councillors. And as our membership builds, we are confident we'll reach 200 by the end of the year. And I think, let me just really give you a total breakdown of a 4-year-old party's representation in all 3 spheres of government. As I've indicated, we've got 134 councillors. So all in all, we have 145 public representatives. Of the 145, it's 134 councillors in 7 provinces. We have the Super 6 here with me, with the absence of Honorable Ngubeni. We have 5 MPLs. Something that, honestly, I think for us as ActionSA, we had Senate on Friday, and we are proud to celebrate this, that we made history in South Africa. Just in a matter of 2 months, January and February, this has never happened in the history of our country. Without going to a by-election, ActionSA managed to get 39 councillors. Unprecedented, historic. This remarkable progress, which would not have been possible without the dedication and leadership of our Deputy President, Dr. Kekana. We really give him the credit because he's the one who opened my eyes. After the last election, sometime in September, I get a call from him to say, Mr. Mashaba, I'd like to see you. I've heard of this political party called Forum for Service Delivery, but I didn't know the people behind this and the magnitude and size of this organization. So he came to my office. I can tell you within half an hour, my eyes were wide open. I saw a huge opportunity. And resulting with us announcing the merger of ActionSA and Forum for Service Delivery, giving us 134 councillors in 7 provinces. Followed 2 weeks ago, Honorable Mabe was with me in Polokwane, where we announced another 5. So 39 councillors in 2 months without going through a by-election. I saw a press statement this morning from one of the big political parties sending a memo to their public representatives, particularly the deputy ministers, that they must get involved in by-elections. They are most welcome as they're fighting, spending a fortune, getting one at a time. Watch the space to see what ActionSA is going to do by the end of this year as we prepare for 2026 local government elections. In closing, I just really want to share with you our new ideology as ActionSA, as well as other parties are fighting to be capitalist, like Herman Mashaba is a capitalist, others are saying they are communist, others are socialist. Ours as ActionSA, we've adopted a new ideology called service deliverism. And I think this was demonstrated by my tenure as the mayor of the city of Johannesburg. As you thought I was always raising the issue of corruption. I think I challenge anyone to really look at the Auditor General's report of the last year of my tenure as the mayor of the city of Johannesburg in terms of how we saved. Fighting corruption made me to save 2.1 billion rands, which was not in the budget, by cutting out the VAT, to fighting corruption and so on. By that, managed in the 3 years, 2.1 billion rands that we unleashed, we took out of the travel, which we got out of the system. I was saying to my colleagues earlier on that when I took over in August 2016 as executive mayor, I started interrogating this budget because obviously coming from the private sector, I've always liked money. And that's something I'm unapologetic about. I was born to be a capitalist, and being a capitalist means you got to make money, and when you make money, you must look after it. So the first thing that I interrogated was this budget. I discovered that the budget approved by the government that we just took out, they had a budget of 76 million rands for international travel. 76 million rands in 1 year. And I said to myself, my goodness, are we running national government or are we running a municipality? What is a municipality where we had, at the time, I'd already discovered the city had 170 billion rands infrastructure backlog. So 76 million rands on international travel to do what? But obviously, legislation prohibits you, as a mayor, to change it. Can only change your budget either during the adjustment budget, this is by February of each year, or when you present your main budget. But then, because I come from an area of the gambling, just to give you an example, for me to be able to go to school, more especially high school, I had to be a gambler. And being a gambler also, you must learn how to save, you know. So I then said to the city manager, Trevor Fowler, who was the city manager at the time, senior member of the ANC, I said, city manager, I know I have no authority to change this budget for now. However, please, can we arrange that before any travel, international travel, is undertaken, can we please bring it to my office to see what the city is going to get out of this international travels? You know what we spent that same year? Just in this, of the 76 million rands, 27 million rands was budgeted for the executive mayor. 27 million rands in 1 year. Came June 2017, when we looked at, you're most welcome to go through those financials. The city of Johannesburg only spent 3.6 million rands. The total. The mayor's office, I did not have, there was not a single cent spent on international travel. They had 27 million rands from the mayor's travel. You know where that money went? Went into running a pilot project in one of the informal settlements to run 24-hour clinics. We use that money for that purpose. That gives you an idea that it is possible. Things that my colleagues have presented to you, these are not pie-in-the-sky proposals. These are things that are highly possible to really be achieved. So thank you very much, colleagues. I'm really and truly proud, and not just me. All the actioners throughout the country and the people of South Africa will forever appreciate the work that you do for them. Thank you very much.
We're going to take it from here because Dr. Mashaba must probably be the first to be asked. So colleagues, thank you so much. We are now going to open a Q&A session. As per the rules, I think, of every Q&A session, you name the publication where you're from, the question that you're posing, and who it is directed to. I think we'll take the first round.
Thank you, Lindsay Dentlinger, Eyewitness News. To Mr. Trollope or Mr. Mashaba, I just want you if you could just explain the sanctioning of a cabinet appointment. Would that be akin to the US system of a confirmation hearing, I think is what they call it? Is that the kind of thought that you're having? I know you did address, Mr. Mashaba, the issue of numbers, because the reality is you don't have the numbers, and we don't have a great success rate in Parliament of private members' bills passing. Where are you in the stage of this bill? Is it already printed, ready for public hearings, public comment to be gazetted? And have you already started the lobbying process to get the numbers to be able to get these bills across the line? Thank you.
Okay, so the process is very similar to what happens in the United States. And as I said, I used the appointment of Judicial Service Commission members, where you get Parliament to endorse. Now, what will happen as a party that has limited representation or a small representation? I think Mr. Mashaba made it very clear. These two pieces of legislation that we're looking at cut across political party lines. They're not parochial, they're actually patriotic. So we will mobilize amongst political parties to say, if you're patriotic and you believe that corruption is a scourge in this country, or you believe that the executive and the representatives on the executive are not exemplary, join us. So to answer your question, how far are we? The one bill is already has been processed. It's just moribund at the moment. We will revitalize that bill, and then it'll go through the processes. The bill around corruption is in its formative stages. It's still got to go to the Speaker. She has to approve it, then it has to go through all the other processes. So it's formative. We are announcing that we are now embarking on these two pieces of legislation. But the important point is, it's not parochial, it's patriotic. And parties that vote against it will have to put their hand to their heart and say, we are voting against this because we endorse corruption, or we're voting against this because we really think we've got a really good cabinet at the moment. And then they'll have to think about those examples that we've spoken about.
Sorry to interrupt then again. Just so how much of the DA's bill have you used?
A lot of it. A lot of it, but we're going to add, and in the documentation there's references to what we're going to add. Like term, if it's 500,000 Rand, that it should be a 15-year sanction, those kind of things we're adding. But we're going to use that documentation because it was good and it was patriotic, but now it's been forgotten because the seat of executive office are quite comfortable, clearly, for the originators of that legislation. So we're going to revive it.
Sinay Pen from Daily Maverick. You've covered my questions around the bills, but I just wanted to go back to, we've had this experience now where our budget has not been tabled as yet. And we've seen now at the weekend this issue around the ANC saying that actually we'll go to the EFF PDA does not to pass it. From an Action SA point of view, can you just take us a bit into your thinking around this bill that has not yet been passed, and what are some of the counter proposals, given this period and this issue around the VAT acts? Where would your party's positioning be, and what are some of the solutions that we, besides what you've mentioned now, what are some of the easier fixes?
So first of all, and I'd like my colleagues to each have a bash at this, because it's relevant to the work we do in our portfolios. And Alan raised some of the important things. Geraldine raised some of the issues. Where we believe the government has not changed their habits is they're not prepared to cut. So they want to increase VAT, but they will not cut fat. So the very first place is you cut fat in order to prevent upping VAT. And they won't do that. And now there's a compromise. Apparently the president has said somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. So that's an indication that they're not prepared to change their bad habits. We believe that there's enough in the budget without increasing tax. We've already reached a point of inflection where the more you tax, the less money you're going to receive, because people start hiding it. And let me tell you one thing about VAT. Yes, the basket of zero-rated goods is being increased, which is great because it does deal with poor people, foodstuffs. But VAT is one of the areas that is most abused in the tax system. People running cash operations abuse VAT. So you can collect VAT, but you don't pay it over if you're running a sneaky tax business. And if you've got half the businesses in this country run by illegal immigrants who are not even registered, you can imagine what that does. It creates an enormous tax hole. So you think you're increasing VAT to collect more revenue, but you're actually not collecting any more revenue. So these are the issues, and we say, first of all, you must start at home. When you look at a budget at home, you've got to identify the costs that you have to pay, your mortgage, your education for your children, your food, transport. Thereafter, you look at what you can do after paying those non-negotiables. And our government will not do that. We have seen the cabinet getting bigger and bigger after each election, despite everyone in that cabinet saying they're opposed to bloated cabinets. The cabinet just gets bigger and bigger. So we say, cut the fat, don't increase VAT. I don't know if
Can I just really address this issue, because it's very important. What this madness about the 2% VAT, it's actually going to mean in real terms. With all this Pakistanis and people of the world identifying South Africa to be the epicenter of criminality, basically by increasing tax, because these people obviously operate on a cash basis. Basically, you are now saying, you know what, we're making the ground fertile for you. Come and play in our space, because you've got additional 2% that this GNU government is actually giving you. It's not going to come to our fiscals. It's going to go and actually invite more criminal activity, because we are giving them an incentive, an extra 2% incentive to come and do their criminality in South Africa. My colleagues, I don't know if
I'd like Alan to take a bite at it.
So there's something.
Alan, but if you can just come here. Audibility. Thank you.
Sorry, I get quite excited when I get asked. So one of the very first things that I picked up in Parliament when I came here was the underfunding of SARS. You know, SARS is seriously underfunded, and it goes back to Tom Moyani's days, where there was an intentional deliberate to cripple SARS, to hamstring them. And the funding has never been made good. And in a written question we asked the finance minister, he confirmed that there was 450 billion tax gap. And then there's also in SARS's financials 450 billion of uncollected tax. So you add the two together, it's 850 billion. We're talking massive amounts of numbers. It's about 40% of government expenditure. So it's nonsensical that SARS remains underfunded. And you can see the SARS commissioner now, he's got 1 year left of his term, he's speaking out, and he's saying SARS should get more funding. And then you ask yourself, why isn't SARS getting more funding? And it's quite clear, because I think as the president said, we're going to go after the the political elite and criminal elite, you know, and criminal syndicates. And so it's just nonsensical that SARS remains underfunding. And for us, that would be an easy win, and we'll get huge amount of money into the fiscus. And what's also very interesting is COSATU have joined the call and the DA have joined the call. And I think more parties that join the call, hopefully the call will be heard. Thank you.
I'd just like Doc to have a bite at it as well, just before we wrap up on that question.
Mine will just be a small bite about process. That part of the things that saddened me about what happened was the budget was not brought to Parliament. Things were discussed outside Parliament because the Minister of Finance is a member of Parliament. And the issue of deferring the budget debate should be a decision that should have been taken by the House. So I hope going forward, the executive will respect the House. That when they are not in agreement, the final decision is the House's decision. So you don't want the final decision to be an agreement between the ANC and the EFF and becomes a done deal, and Parliament, we treat it like puppets, where decisions have been made outside. Because this is where South Africans need to know how we think, how we deliberate, and know how we take decisions about matters that affect their lives. They can't be taken in dark corridors. The government needs to understand what it means to be a minority government. You do not have the numbers. But what that enables us is for things to come to the light. And Parliament becomes the place where decisions are made, not in corridors. The fact that we had to have our leaders being called behind the stage to make a critical decision on the day, that was disrespect for Parliament. Because after those meetings, the Minister of Finance should have been in the House. The President should have been in the House to show that they respect Parliament. And the Minister should be the one that should have presented to us that I can't present a budget to you because there's disagreement. And we, as MPs, should make a decision about what happens on a critical instrument like a budget. So I hope the issue of process will be understood to be important, and that as a small party, we need to ensure that Parliament is not bullied by the executive.
I just want to add to that, and we're on record on the day when the budget was not presented. And some people misunderstand that and say it wasn't passed. It wasn't to be passed, it was just not presented. The passing of the budget will come in future. But I was on record to say there were no winners and there were only losers with the delay in that budget. But the one thing that has, if there's a possible pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, is the fact that the arrogance of a majority government has now come to an end in South Africa. Whereas in the past, the ANC would come with a budget, warts and all, present it, shove it under the noses of Parliament, knowing that they had the numbers to vote and ram it through. Those days are over. So if there's anything positive out of that delay, it's that. But predictably, there were a number of parties that claimed credit for the delay in that budget. The people whose lives depend on a budget in this country were let down by the fact that their arrogance didn't offer South Africans any comfort. Their arrogance has delayed the tabling of a budget so that they can start planning their lives. And our, I don't know, schizophrenic behavior of our executive in Parliament and in their executive is costing South Africans massively. The value of the rand keeps tumbling. The value of money that you have to spend every day on running a family and running your life is becoming less and less valuable because of decisions made by executive government. And these are the issues that we are going to be taking to them over the next few weeks as the process runs through to passing this budget. ActionSA is not going to allow the ANC-led GNU to push a budget under our noses that we will not accept.
That was an exciting question. I think it just got everyone very riled up and excited. Another question, do we have any other questions for this round?
We have 3 questions from online.
From online, okay.
The first is to Dr. Lechape, so you can take it first. It asks, what is ActionSA's reaction to the USAID in SA being cut? What is the message to government following the withdrawal of the funds?
The response of ActionSA is that we need to begin to fund our own health. It is sad what has happened, but it should be a wake-up call. And we will be calling for mobilization of funds. We release a statement that will ask the finance minister and treasury to release the health professions levy. That levy is about health issues. Let it be made available to bridge the gap. People must not make the mistake of thinking that what has happened is not significant. But the fact that we pay for our ARVs, support and care is important. You know, you can give someone a prescription, but you need to make sure that they take the drugs. And part of what that money was doing was the support staff. Research of infectious diseases is dependent on those funds that come from there. When you look at the Medical Research Council, more than 50% of their funding does not come from government. So that is critical in terms of what happens and in terms of we take this matter seriously. Research is important. And that's what's going to be undermined. But let's not forget that in all these areas that were supported by the money from PEPFAR and USAID, there are South Africans that were employed. There are families that are dependent on breadwinners that overnight are out of funds. So we would like the health professions levy to be mobilized to fund the gap. And we would like monies, like pilot money for an NHI that we do not go, we don't know where it's going, that amounting to billions should now be diverted into this emergency that we need. So we're hoping to hear from the finance minister how this 7-8 billion rands gap will be bridged next week on the 12th.
We have another question for Mr. Mashaba. It asks, the Minister of Water and Sanitation, Peme Majudina, said there is no water crisis. Do you agree? And the last question is to Mr. Trollip. What is next for ActionSA with respect to the Minister of Settlements with respect to the VBS matter?
There's no water crisis. I think we must be living in two different planets. I mean, this country, particularly our big metros, but obviously also in the villages. I mean, you take for an example, people of Amanskral, where I come from, where I was born and lived, people lived there with non-drinkable water for almost 20 years. People of Guyana, where just over 4 billion rands was spent, those communities today, even up to today, don't have water. If you look at the city of Johannesburg and so forth, and I think if you look at the water crisis that we are facing, and I think we need to really confront this head on. The reason why we've got water crisis in this country is because of our government's failure to provide the necessary infrastructure. Are in the city of Johannesburg. If you look at infrastructure, for an example, in Sandton, where I live, where in the past, before 1994, someone owned 5,000 square meter property. Today, those stands are converted into high-rise buildings. Accommodating up to 20, 30 the families, some actually even more. But if you look at the city's infrastructure, still the same as the one before pre-1994. So you can imagine how do you expect this infrastructure to cope. So I think for the minister to say we don't have the water crisis, unfortunately this denialism will unfortunately compromise water provision for the country. Let's admit we have corruption, we've got corruption. To deny it, we're making a real big mistake, because I think every time I listen to the president on SONA, when I was here 2 weeks ago listening to the president on SONA, it was like the president and I don't live in the same country. It was about really fiction. So I think definitely South Africa has got a water crisis, but we've been really fortunate the last few years with the rains, but we failed to provide the necessary infrastructure to ensure that people can have water.
Okay, I'll deal with the last question, and then I know my colleague who's facilitating will speak on water.
Yeah,
this is her
absolutely.
portfolio, so she will reinforce some of those thinking. First of all, just my comment about water. I was a mayor for 2 years of a city, and we had non-revenue water losses of around 46%. In Johannesburg, they're up to 49%, which means most of that water is lost to either illegal connections or leakages and wastage. So there is a water crisis. If your dams are full and people don't have water in their homes, there is a problem. And then, of course, one of the biggest problems is polluted water. And I'm sure you're going to talk about that. So to go directly to the question around the two ministers, there was reference to one minister, Minister of Human Settlements, who was the Minister of Justice, Minister Semelane, who was moved sideways to Human Settlements because the President just will not hold anyone in his cabinet to account. Fortunately, after initial refusal by the public protector, I beg your pardon, to investigate, they have committed to us in writing that they will investigate. So we're awaiting the outcomes of that investigation by the public protector, which we will then take back to Cabinet and back to the President to say, now this matter has been investigated, you must act on it. And then we've got the recent case of Minister Nchaveni, who is the minister in the presidency, but she is a very influential minister, very close confidant of the president, and she epitomizes the arrogance of Ramaphosa's cabinet. She herself has already been found guilty in a court of law, in a high court, for corruption and maladministration in the awarding of irregular tenders. Now, there's the perfect example for Cyril Ramaphosa to say, this is no ordinary business, we're going to do things differently, we're going to balance our budget, we're going to hold people to account. But sadly, he won't do that. He won't do it to Semelane, and he won't do it to Nchaveni. But we are not going to leave that. We're going to take the Nchaveni matter to the public protector, and we'll take it to wherever it's necessary to get the president to hold his ministers to account. Thank you.
Thank you. Almost at the end. So we're almost at the end, but I'd also like to have a bite at the water and sanitation issue. That the minister is not living in the South Africa that we are living in, clearly, if she claims that there is no water crisis. We know that not only does the water crisis emanate from the national department, but we also know that our infrastructure in our municipalities is almost non-existent. It has dilapidated and it has aged, and that's where we have most of our water being lost through. South Africa has entered into an agreement with the Lesotho government to offer us water, and at the moment, the Lesotho Highlands Water Project is under maintenance. But it is said that it's going to provide South Africa with more water in the coming years. However, I'm afraid that the reality is our municipalities are not equipped to give people water. Our municipalities have not been professionalized since 1994. They're not capacitated to carry out their duties and ensure that South Africans have water. 50% of these municipalities give our people unsafe water. The South African Human Rights Commission is left wanting because these municipalities refuse to really give our people safe water and sanitation. Our minister needs to do more. There's an issue of infrastructure. There's an issue of wastewater treatments that continue to pollute our water sources. And it is disingenuous for her to come to speak to South Africans and say there is no crisis, when in fact there's a crisis not only from a water resource perspective, but from the municipalities that need to give water to our people. I think Tshwane is a great example of this, where we've seen that people have died. It has led, the lack of water, really great water management has led to deaths. It has been tragic. But we are seeing a turnaround with Dr. Nasiphi Moya, showing that if you have capable leaders and really you start ring-fencing your budget towards water infrastructure and capacitating your municipalities, we can work through this crisis. With those few words, colleagues, I'd like to end the press briefing. We, as the Super Six, realize that the work ahead of us in processing these legislative bills that we have is going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy, and we're not under any illusions. But we are calling on every sensible member of Parliament to really come to the party and help us in terms of ensuring that we process these things and we get them passed for the benefit of South Africans. We, as the Super Six, cannot do the work that we do. 80% of the things that we are able to achieve, and even what you are seeing here today, is a result of our support staff that has been incredible. Dagan, Matthew, Jacques, and Stefan, thank you very much for being the wind beneath our wings. We, as a Super Six caucus, really do appreciate your efforts. Thank you so much, colleagues from the media corps. When we do call you again, do honor the invitation again. Thank you, South Africans.